Want to give it another minute or two?
Yeah, it's still clicking up on participants, so I think I'll wait till a minute or two past the half hour, and then we'll get started. Why, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Well, we still have some people streaming in, but my name is Joel Stone. I'm on the advisory board member of the Business Climate Leaders, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. This is our third in a series of panel discussions that's focused on food and agriculture within the context of climate change and climate restoration. Citizen Climate Lobby, or as we call it, CCL, is an international organization of more than 200,000 volunteers, mostly in Canada and the US, with coverage in every congressional district. Our current focus is the inclusion of a carbon fee and dividend in the reconciliation package that's moving through Congress. The carbon fee and dividend model levies a fee on the CO2 equivalent of fossil fuels and returns revenue to household. Business Climate Leaders is an action team of CCL, and our mission at BCL is to engage businesses from diverse sectors of the economy in promoting legislation and policies that CCL supports. A carbon fee and dividend will have profound impacts on the agricultural sector, which is using fossil fuel inputs for synthetic fertilizers made from natural gas, as well as herbicides and insecticides produced from oil. Today, our panel will focus on community-level farm-to-fork food systems and introduce some exciting concepts from around the country and actually around the world that showcase innovations which are changing the future of food and drastically reducing the use of fossil fuel inputs, while at the same time stimulating the sequestration of carbon out of the atmosphere and into producing a much healthier soil. We have a great panel for you all this afternoon, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our panelists, and we're going to start off with Sophie Egan. Sophie will provide a brief introduction, then we'll move to Keith, and then to Ken, and then finish off with Eric, and then Klaus will lead as moderator in an open discussion, followed by Q&A. So Sophie, turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joel, and terrific to be with everyone for this important topic. So I'm Sophie Egan, and I wear many hats, which is the theme of this intro slide. I really work on food systems transformation from both consumption and production, so bottom up and top down, if you will. I try to change the environment in the first place toward healthier, more sustainable options in the marketplace and create the enabling environment throughout the supply chain. And those are the first roles. So Full Table Solutions, a consulting practice that's accelerating solutions at the intersection of food, health, and climate. And within those, senior advisor for sustainable food systems at R&DE Stanford Dining. I really work on a procurement level or on a campus level. And then I'm here today actually as co-director of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, which I'll mention more in a moment. But that's an exciting consortium of campus dining programs all around the US and abroad. And then my roles toward the bottom are really on that consumption side, engaging eaters within the environment we've got today. How do they best navigate and be the demand, the pull for that healthier, more sustainable, climate smart way of eating that we all want to see in the future? And I do that through books and writing for the New York Times health section, answering reader questions and inserting a sustainability lens. Next slide, please. So the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative is a global network of colleges and universities, really university-based food leaders from now 68 institutions. We've got 270 members. And this is a remarkable collaboration between chefs, faculty, academic researchers, students, university administrators, nutritionists, and sustainable food program managers, and we all work together using campus dining halls as living laboratories, as well as a collective purchasing power to advance research, education, and innovation toward those healthier, more sustainable food choices. So excited to dig into this more and really speak to the power of deliciousness in elevating this climate smart food future that we all hope to see. So great to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. I'll turn it over to you, Keith.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Keith Burns from Bladen, Nebraska. My brother and I, we farm here in South Central Nebraska. We own and operate a 2,000-acre farm where we're growing a diverse array of crops: corn, soybeans, cereal grains, buckwheat, sunflowers. A lot of what we grow, we try to put into our cover crop seed business. We started green cover seed about 12 years ago in response to what we saw cover crops doing on our own farming operation. We saw the benefits to the soil. We saw the benefits to the livestock. We saw the benefits that it could do for our own family and for our community. And we'll be talking more about that. But just to give you an idea of how fast the whole cover crop industry has grown, when we first started selling cover crop seed in 2009, we sold enough seed to cover about 1,000 acres. This year, 12 years later, we'll move enough seed out the door here at Green Cover Seed to cover about 1 million acres. And we started with no employees, and now we have about 50 employees. And so it makes a big difference in our small rural community here. So we've learned a lot about not only about regenerative farming practices, but also about how to run a business and how to manage people and do all of these things within the context of regeneration. And so we're not only trying to regenerate our soils, but we're trying to regenerate families and communities as well. Next slide. So one of the things that we do, as you can see here, is we really focus a lot on education and outreach. So the little graphic off to the left here is our most recent soil health resource guide. This is an 80-page full-color book that we print every year. Every year has new content. We print 25 to 35,000 of these and try to get them out to producers. We try to get them out to educators. We're getting them out to conservation districts and FFA chapters and 4-H groups because this has information about soil health. It has information about regenerative ag. And it's not just written by us. We have many guest authors, everybody from David Montgomery and Ray Archuleta and Christine Jones, who are some of the top names, some of the top minds in regenerative agriculture. So we focus a lot on education and outreach because we really believe our marketing strategy for this all along has been, if people truly understand how the soil functions and what's going on in the soil, then these cover crops, they just literally sell themselves. And so our focus has always been education and outreach. And I hope to share some of the things that we've learned throughout our journey with you here today. So glad to be with you.
Thank you, Keith. And Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Ken Roseborough, and I'm the editor of the Organic and Non-GMO Report, the news magazine focusing on the markets for organic and non-GMO grains, ingredients, and food products. And in our 20 years of publishing, we've become recognized as the leading information source for these two fast-growing markets. And in the past few years, as soil health and regenerative agriculture have become leading trends, we've been covering these trends extensively, reporting on research about regenerative farming practices, as well as covering profiles of farmers and food companies that are leading this trend. And the cover of the issue that you see here from our January-February issue features a unique partnership between a food brand, Quinn Snacks, whose CEO, Christy Lewis, is on the left, and regenerative farmer Steve Tucker, who's in Nebraska. And Steve supplies Quinn with regeneratively produced grains for their food products. And I think we're going to see more such unique partnerships between regenerative farmers and food brands going forward as this regenerative farming trend continues. Next slide, please. We also publish an annual directory, the Organic and Non-GMO Source Book. This is a farm to fork directory of suppliers of non-organic and non-GMO seeds, grains, ingredients, feed, and food products. Also, I am a member of the design team of the Soil Climate Alliance, an initiative of Green America that is working to advance regenerative agriculture and soil health as ways to mitigate climate change and produce more nutrient-dense foods. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Eric, you need to take yourself off mute, Eric.
Yeah,
There you
thanks.
go. Success. There you go.
You're looking for my slides, of which I have none. So yeah, thanks for putting this together. My name is Eric Jackson. I'm recently retired as of earlier this year after spending almost 40 years in the supply chain development commercial world, doing some work both in nonprofits, but mostly in the commercial world, helping to solve some challenging problems in many sectors of the agricultural economy. Most recently, a group named Pipeline Foods was my vision, and I founded that. Unfortunately, that group declared bankruptcy in July, and we won't dwell on that here, but I'm more than happy to fill in questions for anybody who has them. You know, my work nowadays, you know, my wife calls me retired, but I'm still sneaking around doing projects. So I'm working in the area of regenerative ag, the organic space, particularly at the intersection of soil, nutrition, and human health. Working with several organizations such as the Forever Green Partnership, based out of the University of Minnesota, that's focused on continuous living cover crops. A group called Other Half Processing that is working on developing premium markets for the other half of specially raised animals. A group called Home Plate Foods that is involved in developing a new market channel for regenerative foodstuffs into the healthcare food service sector. And another organization, which I'm here representing today, called the Bionutrient Food Association, which is doing primary research, trying to connect the dots between farming practices, soil outcomes, crop outcomes, and health outcomes. There's a continuum there, but much more research is needed. So be happy to elaborate on those as we move through the session today. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Eric. And that's our, as you see, we have a very strong group of panelists. And with that, I will turn it over to Klaus Mager. Klaus heads up the ag sector at Business Climate Leaders, and he'll be moderating the session today. So I'll turn it over to you, Klaus.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. And welcome to everyone. From an administrative issue here, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen. And if you see some questions that you like, please upvote them. It makes it easier for us to find the most pertinent topics. So to recap briefly from our previous panel discussions, you know, we had with the Kiss the Ground team was our first webinar. Second one was with a group of farmers and soil scientists. So to summarize our core learnings here was that soil has the capacity to sequester large amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere. In the process, also provide important ecosystem services, you know, like protecting topsoil from erosion, biodiversity, water retention, nutrient density of food. But to regenerate soil and to restore the microbiome via photosynthesis, you know, using sunlight to bring carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the soil, requires an adjustment to the way we grow our food, adapting local types and conditions of the soil, availability of water, local climates, and also socioeconomic factors. So as farmers now adjust types of crops, use specialized seeds, start rotating their crops to regenerate their soil, they will need markets for these products to sell into. And such adjustments will impact the entire food supply chain, which will involve the active participation of, as Sophie calls, the eater, which means all of us, starting within our own community. So today, we want to discuss this in some detail and introduce some best practice examples from around the country. So with that, let me start out with Keith. So Keith, if we were to prioritize, you know, at local community level, the sequestration of carbon into soil, restore soil health, and with that, the surrounding ecosystem, biodiversity, water tables, nutrient density of food, what would that look like, you know, in different places around the country? with your approach to seed and cover crops?
Well, I mean, it looked beautiful. It would look like, what things are supposed to be, the way that they were created to be. When I think about that question, the word that keeps coming to my mind is opportunity. It would look like greatly enhanced opportunities for many farmers with that type of a soil ecosystem, with the carbon back in the soil, with the water cycle restored, with the nutrients cycling properly, with the biological activity functioning in the soil the way that it's supposed to. It's going to open up a lot of opportunities for farmers. And when I talk about that, and then because the farmers have the opportunities, it's going to create many opportunities for communities as well. Because the death of the rural communities has been the consolidation of farms. And where there used to be a farm on every quarter section, because that's, all that a person could do with a lot of manual labor. Now there's, farmers farming, 8, 10, 12, 20,000 acres. And that doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, but what it has done is a lot of people have left the rural communities, and then the rural communities are drying up and dying because of lack of people. And so when we restore the ecosystem, when we restore the carbon, farm profitability comes back. The land is going to be much more productive with lower inputs. That translates to much higher profitability. That means I don't have to farm nearly as many acres in order to make a living, which number one means there can be more neighbors, there can be more people back in the farming game. But the other thing that it does, I believe, is it allows me as a farmer now to grow some specialty type things, especially if there is a push to develop markets for some of these regeneratively grown products, where now I can command a premium because what I'm growing is a better product. It has higher nutrient density. What I'm growing has value in the marketplace, and I'm not just hauling it to the elevator or to the co-op and it's getting dumped into a huge pile with everybody else's corn or soybeans. It now becomes a premium product, much like the article that Ken just showed us with Steve Tucker. Now I can go directly into the food chain with this. I can command a higher premium. And now that opens up lots of opportunities. Maybe I add value by cleaning these things. Maybe I add value by doing some pre-packaging. That all takes people to do, and that's going to bring people back to these communities, bring people back to these small towns. Like say right here in rural Nebraska, we've got 50 employees now, where 10 years ago, we had 2. And so it will bring people back into the landscapes and help rebuild some of these local communities. And regardless of whether you're in Nebraska or Kansas or California or New York, those opportunities are going to be there. But unless we fix the soil issue, unless we fix the soil problem, not only will we not have land to farm long term, but it's going to be with such thin margins that farmers have to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because the margins are so thin. You just have to farm massive amounts. So again, the word that just comes to my mind on that, Klaus, is it's going to open up opportunities for farmers and for communities if we can do that.
So talk a little bit about you have this wonderful speech on carbonomics. Talk a little bit about how will this impact the types of crops and the types of seeds that you would use to optimize your local soil. How is this different in Florida than it is in Oregon?
Yeah, well, yeah. So the concept of carbonomics, and it's a talk that I put together. I've given it all around the country and to several different parts of the world. And I think it's such an engaging way to talk about soil health, because I compare what's going on in the soil with the economy of a country. And we talk about it from the supply and demand and currency and capital and infrastructure and energy and resources and defense. And all those things that we see happening and operating in the economy of a country, they're being mirrored with what's going on in the soil. And there's a very vibrant, active economy within the soil. And it's between the plants and the biology primarily, but the soil plays a part of it as well. And so that concept plays out in the fact that plants are creating root exudates. They're growing through photosynthesis, taking the carbon out of the atmosphere, the CO2 out of the atmosphere, And they're essentially selling it to all the biology, because biology has to exist on carbon. It's their food source, but they can't photosynthesize. They can't create carbon. Only plants can do that. And then the biology brings all these services back to the plants. And so, you know, from a local concept, you know, and those principles apply to everywhere plants grow. You know, plants are going to photosynthesize. They're going to feed biology. The biology in return returns, you know, all of these services and valuable products to the plants. So from a local perspective, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm going to grow the crops that make the most sense for my area. There's going to be some crops, you know, because of my temperature, my rainfall distribution, some things are going to work better in my area than what would work in Montana or Texas or California. And they're going to have things that work best in their area. The principles are the same. We just have to figure out, how do we apply those principles? But one of the main principles that we teach and we stress over and over again with soil health and regenerative ag is you have to keep a plant growing out there. If you are growing one crop and then there's 3 or 4 month fallow period before the next crop is growing, that fallow period is not letting the land rest. Contrary to what a lot of people think when they see just, you know, bare dirt out there, they think, oh, look at that. You know, that farmer's really letting that land rest. Isn't that nice of them? There's nothing restful about that whatsoever, because the only way the biology eats is through the plants producing that carbon red exudate through photosynthesis. The only way that soil gets protected is by having plants growing. If you can see the soil, there's a good chance it's going to wash away, or it's going to blow away, or it's going to get too hot, or it's going to get too cold. The goal that we have on our farm, we never want to see our soil unless we go looking for it. We want to have to spread the plants apart. We want to have to move the residue from previous crops apart, and then we can see our soil, because when you can see it, it's at risk. And so the whole concept of carbonomics is, in large part, it's bringing the biology back into the system. That, you know, again, the way that it would have been, you know, generations ago, the way that it was designed to be created. The biology is driving so much of the nutrient processes that when we are farming without biology, we have to, and in the concept of economics, we have to give it a lot of welfare. And that's when we have to put the fertility, we have to put the crop protection out there. And I'm not advocating that we completely eliminate that. They're tools. You know, all of these things, tillage, chemicals, all these things are tools, and different farmers are going to have different tools in their toolbox, but they all need to be used responsibly. They all need to be used the least amount possible, because that's going to lead to profitability. And so that whole concept of carbonomics is going to have universal principles with very specific applications and that's the art form. The art form is, and there's some tremendously creative farmers, and we're so blessed to be able to work with many of them. They're very creative in how they take these principles and they apply them to their local area to really create some unique cropping systems. And the creativity of the American farmer is just really, really fun to see. And if you've never had a chance to work with some of these innovative farmers and producers, just go find them, seek them out, find the ones that are direct marketing things to the consumer. They're going to be amongst the most innovative. They're just a pleasure and joy to work with.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Yeah, that was really helpful to understand the differentiation here. Ken, so if I can move on and ask you, now that we are looking at differentiated products, maybe some products that haven't been present before in a specific community. What are the challenges for small to mid-sized farms to enter into wholesale markets with these differentiated products? What do you see as the hurdles here?
Yeah, some of the challenges. What I just wanted to comment on what Keith said about reviving, how this trend could revive rural communities. I think of an example in Nebraska. There's a company, Grain Place Foods, with David Vetter, who's a regenerative organic farmer. And his farm is surrounded by thousands of acres of corn and soybeans. And you hardly see anybody on the land, while he has this Grain Place Foods, he's processing organic grains, and he's hiring a lot of people from the local community. And it's just one example of a business, a regenerative business that could help revive rural communities. Getting back to your question about the challenges for small to mid-sized farmers to enter the market with their regenerative products, I think making the connections. I think of what Steve Tucker did with Quinn Snacks, making that connection. And there was an organization called Mad Agriculture, and they're based in Colorado, and they're trying to make connections between regenerative farmers and food brands. And they facilitated this connection between Quinn Snacks and Steve Tucker. And there's other organizations that are doing similar things. There's Practical Farmers of Iowa as well. And they worked with Sustainable Food Lab, which is based in Massachusetts. And they connected farmers in Iowa, excuse me, in Iowa and Minnesota who were growing oats for Oatly. So they all work together, and these farmers are supplying oats for Oatly's oat milk products. So I think one of the big challenges is making that connection between the farmers and the brands. And it seems like working with smaller brands initially may be easier for some of these producers. And also, one of the challenges, I think, is for farmers to supply enough volume to meet the brand's needs. I think of, there's a farmer in Minnesota, John Strophus, who is supplying organic sunflowers to Simple Mills, a Chicago-based company that's making organic snack foods and crackers. So John was supplying organic sunflowers to them, and he didn't have quite enough volume. So he connected with some other farmers who were growing organic sunflowers. And together they were able to pool their production to supply Simple Mills with the amount of volume they need. So that can be a challenge for farmers, is supplying enough volume. And there's also the logistics of delivering for a producer to deliver his crop to their buyer. I'll talk about the lack of infrastructure, the lack of grain handling facilities for these differentiated products, and how that's really needed. And so farmers could have trouble with transportation. They may have to travel a long ways to deliver their differentiated products to a processor or a miller. So those costs could be high. For example, the farmers in Minnesota and Iowa that are supplying oats for Oatly are delivering their oats to grain millers, which has facilities in Iowa and Minnesota to dehull the oats, and from there the oats go to Oatly's processing facilities in the West or the East. So the farmers and the brands would have to work together to plan the production as far ahead as possible, which would be beneficial for the farmers so they know what they're going to need to produce. Weather can always be an issue with production, can cause problems with the farmer's production. So good communication is essential between the farmers and the brands. But I think these farmer-brand relationships can actually be beneficial for consumers too, because consumers increasingly want to know where their food is coming from and even who's growing it. So it helps to increase transparency. So with more organizations coming online like Mad Agriculture and Practical Farmers of Iowa, Sustainable Food Lab, and another organization, Great Plains Regeneration, it just launched this past year, and one of their main goals, one of their missions, is to make these connections. They want to be a connector between the regenerative farmers and the food brands. So it'll be interesting to see how their works develops over the years.
So that, of course, makes it so important to look at this at community level. So the national and international supply chain, of course, is a huge undertaking. But from rebuilding the system from ground up at community, at small scale, may be the next step to focus on. So these are then local supply chains that at community level, where the aggregator and the retailer has to work with the farmer to bring local foods to the consumer. Eric, maybe we'll switch over and listen to your latest after retirement endeavor here, to think about the health impacts of foods that are nutrient deficient or that are not in compliance with dietary guidelines. So how is soil health linked with human health? You're muted, Eric. You have to unmute.
I'm trying to be a good citizen and then I forget. I mean, Keith did a great job of explaining, the technical exchange, so to speak, between plants and their environment. And the same thing holds true for animals as consumers of forage, right? So really all the crops that we eat that come through the agricultural system are heavily reliant on the quality of what they eat. And soil is an intermediary, so to speak, between the food source for the plants and the food source for the animals, and the microbiome in that soil. So, research has definitely shown that healthier soils with higher carbon content and a robust microbiome produce crops with higher nutrient density. That's not a controversial statement. The research also shows a very high degree of variability in nutrient densities of crops derived from different regions with different soils and different farming practices. There's more research necessary, so the work that we're doing at Bionutrient Food Association is trying to create empirical information that both the marketplace and the farming community can use. Ultimately, with a goal, it's a very lofty goal of switching out quality for quantity in the food system and allowing the growers to get paid for a metric that they aren't currently able to get paid for, at least not at scale. And that would be a quality metric. The human health side, malnourishment has replaced undernourishment or caloric insufficiency as the primary food-related cause of death, cause of non-communicable disease. Diabetes, cancer, various cancers, various cardiovascular diseases are tied to food quality. So you can see that there's a downstream interest in nutrient density, but the direct connection with the soil is this: healthier soil produces healthier food in the form of nutrient density, and just more research is necessary to tease it out. I'll kind of slip into what I know the next question is coming. The point about what the recommendations are from the USDA and other dietetic groups about recommended daily allowances of nutrients is a wholly insufficient view of nutrition. It really only keys in on a dozen or so nutrient values, and really the secret sauce coming out of our foods are things like polyphenols, which are not mentioned in the USDA literature or in the RDAs. These are things that are directly tied to the soil microbiome and the robust, energetic biology in the soil that feeds the plants, that produces the higher quality food. So, that along with toxicity, I know that we're not here to talk too much about that, but toxicity, Keith sort of alluded to it a little bit. It beats up the soil pretty bad. It beats up the microbiome of the soil pretty bad. But it also has an impact on digestive tracts of humans and other animals. It has neurological impacts. So when we talk about healthy quality food, which I do believe is more marketable to the consumer groups than just the environmental outcomes. You know, consumers care about carbon in the form of climate change mitigation, carbon sequestration. They care about environmental incomes, but ultimately everybody is selfish and wants to do the best thing that they can for themselves and their families. So I think developing markets for these nutrient-dense products will pull through the benefit of the carbon sequestration programs that everybody's trying to develop, whether it's at the cover cropping level or whether it's at the crop rotation level or whether it's at the crop processing level. So that's an area of high interest, and I hope to, if we were having this webinar 3 months from now, I'd hope to be able to report that our first pilot, which will be in New York City for delivering regenerative animal proteins, we're starting there, into community-based kitchens, will be up and running with about 80,000 meals a day. And then that's staged to go nationwide in the not too distant future. So developing markets focused on food quality, which implies that we're focused on soil quality prior to the food quality. There's just this beautiful continuum that we can get everybody engaged around.
Talk a little bit more about toxicity. You mentioned that sort of in passing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, this becomes a very hot button issue. I mean, I've got hundreds of farmer friends and we have robust conversations, especially if there's a Budweiser involved. But you know, so I'll pick on glyphosate for a moment because it's easy to pick on. You know, the glyphosate has been shown to have a multitude of effects, and there's many claims that there's no carcinogenic effect, and there are other claims that there are carcinogenic effects. But in addition to the cancer component, what we do know is that glyphosate as a designed chemical affects the Shikimate pathway in plants. And everybody says, well, we're not plants, so we're immune from that. But the gut microbiome behaves much more like the soil microbiome than the rest of our body does. And so the same toxicity that glyphosate provides to plants in nature, it can provide to our microbiome in our stomachs. And that has profound implications across a spectrum of neurological disorders, digestive issues, and even reproductive issues. So getting chemistry out of the food system is an important feature. You know, stuff like what Keith's doing is critically important because you can replace, like he says, you go back to the way it was intended to be. You can replace these welfare programs that are provided through chemicals with the natural system, and that thereby reducing the toxicity across the platform of food manufacturing. That coupled with higher nutrient density will definitely lead to better human health as well as ecological health outcomes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a perfect transition to Sophie. I wanted to ask Sophie, you know, children are profoundly impacted by nutrition, which is needed to develop them both physically, but also mentally, because the brain needs very specific nutrients to evolve into a healthy adult person. So with so many confusing commercial messages around food, what is being done to educate and excite children about the foods they eat and create a connection with where it comes from? And I know you're working on those things, Sophie.
Yes, well, there's so much to say about that. I mean, the good news is that this is not a new topic. So lots of great work has been done. What I really am intrigued by is a couple of developments more recently. So one is the idea of universal school meals and just bare minimum access to sufficient food that is nutritious in schools. This is a huge policy shift that could have the most dramatic effects purely by virtue of students having the foods that they need to thrive, both physically and mentally, as you said. If that occurs, and it's basically happening in this moment, which was in large part by the pandemic, that's the single biggest shift that will occur because you'll have all kinds of things accounted for. But more peripherally, there's been just hosts of NGOs working on this through a number of programs. One of the several that I'll highlight is Food Corps, which is essentially an AmeriCorps program that teaches kids about how to grow food, where food comes from, and it's all around this idea of food literacy. One of the things that is also a big topic is that, you used to learn these types of topics, where food comes from, how to cook, how to feed yourself, nutrition, really life skills related to food in home ec, right? And a lot of that got removed from core curriculum. So while I love the work of Food Corps, there's Edible Schoolyard out of Berkeley, and Chef Alice Waters, her pioneering program, countless other food cooking classes and so forth. They're really kind of filling a gap. And what I'm excited about is the prospect of greater integration and kind of coordination around what are the metrics demonstrating that actually leads to eating in ways that are more nutritious, and ideally also that it's this interconnection of health and sustainability. So could there be a nationwide food literacy curriculum? One of the other barriers is that a lot of times this is all considered extracurricular, right? When food is foundational, and the more that we bring food into the classroom and bring children's educational experiences into the cafeteria, the greater those connections will become. But taking a step back, essentially what we know is that when kids grow food themselves, they're more, especially vegetables, they're more likely to like it. When foods taste better, they're more likely to like it. And I mean vegetables in particular. One of the interesting areas is that we tend to treat kids as if they're not also, humans. They're like a separate species. The kids are sophisticated, and actually the more that we can ensure that those foods are scratch cooked, so it's not just education. Education is one piece in the behavior change puzzle, but it's a critical engagement that the food actually be delicious, that it be varied, and that they have a role if they ever have the chance to grow it themselves or cook it themselves. The likelihood of that positive feedback loop that then can be replicated throughout an entire lifetime. And also it's that palate formation that occurs early in childhood that is such a prime window of opportunity that really is what I would argue is the most distinctive versus in our adult years. So many preferences, what is comfort food, what defines those happy moments, and also really truly palate formation in terms of taste, spice tolerance, appreciation of different cuisine types and so forth. And so another big realization recently is that kids actually have more adventurous palates than you might give them credit for, and that is a key inroad. Kind of global cuisines is an inroad to food systems. So a little bit along the lines of what Eric mentioned, big picture in terms of the hierarchy of what people are looking for when they're making a food choice, consistently it's taste, health, cost for adults, not for kids so much, and convenience. And environment has been gradually going up that chart, but it's still very far lower on the list. Differences by generation, differences by psychographic and so forth. But overall, it really is bottom line taste. Flavor is the #1 best practice in terms of getting kids excited about it. Because if it doesn't taste good, it doesn't matter how healthy and sustainable it is. No one wants to eat it. And again, it's that positive feedback loop. If you have a negative experience with a Brussels sprout that's boiled, been bland and so forth, you're probably not going to try it again. You don't want to learn about it. You don't want to do anything about it because it was just nauseating. It's truly profound. If you have a good experience with it, all kinds of positive ripple effects occur. The other thing I'll just mention, 2 last points on that. One is this really important shift in how we talk about this, which is from food insecurity to nutrition insecurity. And this is what Eric was speaking about, which is not enough to just put calories in bellies. It's really about the quality of food and ensuring that base level access that every child has. Then you can build in food literacy and all of the connections in terms of sustainable food systems, nutrition, life skills such as cooking, meal planning, selecting in compliance with your medical needs or allergens, and the whole host of kind of gastronomic citizenship, voting in support of policies that support the food system we want to see, and so on and so forth. But the foundation is simply that access. The last thing I'll mention is the critical importance of chefs. The other major piece of research, other than knowing that if you cook food yourself, or if you grow food yourself, is that chefs in classrooms, in cafeterias, introducing these topics in communication. I work a lot on communication behavior change. Who is the messenger matters. And with kids, chefs especially have a huge influence. Celebrities also have a huge influence. And we know that, as you said on the marketing, all the junk food has leveraged all those tricks in the marketing toolbook. So we can draw on a lot of those. And there are some interesting examples like that. F&V is one, fruit and veg, that has kind of taken that whole playbook and said, we're going to do the same thing, but with fruits and vegetables. So there's a lot of things that can occur. The biggest barrier from my perspective at the moment is not having a national kind of food literacy curriculum built in and sort of, default, but B is the sheer disparity in marketing dollars. So if you look at any food company, how much they're spending on all the crap versus how much they're spending on all the good stuff, that's where really the rubber hits the road, in my opinion.
Which of course now is the idea of promoting community-based food systems, because we can sort of bypass all that. So for example, school canteens can generate demand for local farmers and can interact with local farmers. And I think there's some exciting examples around the country of that, right?
Yeah, so and I mean, that's a fantastic transition to the power of institutional procurement and institutional food service, because when you're referring to kind of misleading marketing, that's typically, in my view, is mostly at the retail level. Yes, absolutely, on fast food and so forth. But if you think about how many meals in, say, first 18 years of your life, or if I work on campus dining, if you're in a campus dining environment, these are captive environments, right? You're eating at these places multiple times a day, multiple times a week, over years of your life. You have a huge, huge opportunity to shape the food identity, the values and preferences, but also just the volume of food in the school food program, in campus dining, in corporate dining, healthcare, as was mentioned as well. These are huge levers for systems change for that marketplace. And some of the examples that I'm really excited about, one is Menus of Change, which of course is the foundation of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and rewarding better agricultural practices is one of the core principles that's given to these food service leaders who adopt this framework. And encouragingly, some of the largest food service companies in the world have adopted the Menus of Change framework. Compass Group North America, for example, Google, a number of fast casual and other restaurant chains, in addition to those non-commercial institutional purchasers. The other big area that's exciting is Good Food Purchasing Program, which is a framework that is adopted by a variety of different institutional purchasing decision makers around the US. Local economies is one of the key pillars of their 5 values, in addition to environmental sustainability. And so the more that these interconnections, kind of multi-solving, as I love that term, where you are sourcing more regionally, you're investing in community development in your immediate area, you're leveraging these kind of anchor institutions, and even better is when you're in the kind of consortium. So I'm actually on the Good Food Purchasing Policy Council I'm based in Boulder, and so for Denver, and you have a healthcare system, a school, public school system, a museum, and soon, hopefully, the university. And that's where the network effect really takes off and can be that vision that you're speaking to, Klaus. And just lastly, to bring it kind of more concrete to regenerative ag, which is certainly kind of contained within better agricultural practices, and then also within local economies and sustainable environmental sustainability, those pillars. There's a really exciting effort in Northern California called Regen 1, which is this multi-sector consortium of food service leaders. Stanford Dining is one of the participants that I've helped lead that effort, that have all made purchasing commitments to source from Northern California farmers who are employing regenerative practices. And it's in response to this need for assurance that, if you build it, they will come, this whole kind of piece of guaranteeing that the marketplace is there. So I'm really excited about some of those opportunities and agree there's profound opportunity, and it's just a matter of operationalizing it.
Yeah, I always think that if the Greta Thunberg generation, I call it, could understand the link between soil health and climate change, we could supercharge this whole thing.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add on that it's a huge opportunity, because right now you have a generation, Gen Z especially, that is so fired up about climate. And yet, like I mentioned about this hierarchy, it's remarkable how much they're not seeing the connection to do so through food and ag. And so you'll ask the same person, how much do you care about climate? And they're like, I care so much about climate. And then how flexitarian of a diet are you eating? Or how much do you care about food waste? Or how, and so forth, of these climate smart ag practices. And this is where really the cultural norms, and not just education, but engagement of that generation could be explosive in terms of growing the overall demand. But it hasn't happened yet, and it is a major disconnect.
Yeah, got to make it happen. So let me move on to really what is the title of our discussion today, farm to fork community food systems. What are retailers doing to support local farmers and feature local products? How can we get local products into the grocery store at scale? Starting at community, obviously, not top down, but the bottom up in your community. How can we get the retail industry to participate more actively? So open this up to the panel. Whoever wants to respond first here.
Yeah, I can go first. I think the retailers need to hear from their consumers. I think that's really key. The retailers will listen to their customers, and if customers want regeneratively grown products, then I think the retailers will respond in kind to purchase those.
Okay. Keith, how about can we hear from you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult thing. Most farmers who are really good at production are not very good at marketing, and the ones who are really good at marketing a lot of times aren't that great at production. There are a few who are very good at both, and they're very successful. So I think that some local co-ops of individual regenerative producers who can bundle their things together and get it to a retailer may help. One of the easiest things, and I guess I say easiest, but one of the more popular things for farmers to try to grow, to get into right to the consumer is meat. And particularly, grass-finished beef is becoming more and more popular. There's, I believe, a huge market demand for that, but it's really being limited by the processing capacity because these individual producers are pretty well locked out of the big packers, and COVID really exposed some insufficiencies that we have in that. And so I think you'll see some things happening with expanded processing capacity, and that's not going to go just for meat. Meat requires more processing than a vegetable or a grain. But I think as we not only have to ramp up the production side of things, we have to ramp up that intermediate level of processing as well to get it to the retailer, because the retailer can't take a semi-load of grass-fed cattle. It's got to go through a processor somewhere. And so as we ramp up production, we also have to ramp up the processing capabilities to get it to the retailer. And so I don't think we can lose sight of that as we're going through all this as well.
That, of course, involves the entire community because of zoning laws and permitting issues, regulatory issues, and so on.
Yeah.
Eric.
Yeah, I guess I'd answer with, if you'll indulge me for a minute, if you can imagine a future in the next 10 to 15 years where biofuels aren't as prevalent as they are today because we've electrified a large portion of our transportation system. And if you take a look at the number of acres that are dedicated to biofuel production today, give or take 50 million acres directly and many more acres indirectly, if you can imagine rings around urban centers where the food system becomes localized by a combination of urban dwellers, many people in the BIPOC community, and the folks who currently own the land, but who are sort of stuck in this biofuels rut, if you will, in terms of marketing primarily corn, but certainly soy and other oil seeds. Imagine that land being repurposed for these specialty crop systems that are supported by the work that Keith does, that feed programs like the ones that Sophie's involved in. And that what we call retail today actually reverses back to the way retail used to be, where people were engaged and involved and understood where their food came from, because it really wasn't that far away. They may even be directly involved in it themselves. I know it sounds, very utopian in its picture, but I think that is a very real possibility, because we are going to take a lot of acres out of biofuel production, and if we focus on those urban rings as the place where we replace those commodity products with food products, I think things will change relatively rapidly for all the reasons that everybody else has already said.
Yeah, thanks. Sophie, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say to Keith's point that, I think it shouldn't fall to the farmers to be marketing. And I'm really excited about opportunities to connect through local tourism. And another organization, Food for Climate League, that I'm part of, is really interested in kind of how COVID has not only raised awareness and interest around community and regional food systems, but around local travel, right? And for a number of reasons. And so how you can better kind of leverage your local tourism boards. I am from Seattle, for example, and if you go to Pike Place Market, like the original farmers market in the US, it's mostly really healthy, sustainable foods, but they're not telling you come have this local, this healthy, sustainable food. It's really about connection, relationships, taste, diversity, biodiversity, varietals you've never tried, adventure, discovery. And all those are really more about a concept that I wrote about in my first book, All About American Food Culture, which is this idea of an experiential resume. Inherently, we have this intrinsic desire to collect interesting experiences throughout our lives. And again, I just think if you could engage more of the marketing reps at like the city and state level to act on behalf of those ecosystems of farmers and position it those ways, it would be just a total shift in how it's talked about. So there's just some interesting ideas, I think, that have yet to be fully seized, but I don't think it should be on the burden of the farmers themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because when you look at some cities or communities that have these amazing food cultures, right? You look at San Francisco or New Orleans or New York, Chicago. I mean, these wonderful restaurants and certain food types and recipes that they are known for, and you just have to go and eat in these when you are visiting. Absolutely. So there is a certain character.
Right. It's just one and the same of being from that place and being a resident of that place, and it can, I think, truly become just the norm for wherever, whatever pocket of and celebrating. It's really a truly opportunity to celebrate what's distinct about your area.
Yeah, no, I love that.
I just wanted to comment about the. I'm seeing there's a major trend I'm seeing right now with regional and local milling of flour, that nationwide from Maine to California, there's these regional and local mills are emerging, and farmers in those areas are supplying these mills with wheat and other heirloom grains, and it's helping to shorten the supply chains and create local and regional supply chains that are much more resilient. I think you had mentioned, Klaus, the shortcomings of the longer supply chains. So it's a very encouraging trend that's happening with local and regional milling emerging.
Yeah. So we have some questions from the audience we need to get to. And so there's one question from Rachel in California. She's a conservation technician for the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. And she's saying our agriculture department advocates for regenerative practices to local farmers. One difficulty we encounter is adopting cover crops is the extra cost, especially of irrigation during another extreme drought. Do you have any advice for convincing farmers to use cover crops and other regenerative practices? And here's this question, of course, only 12% of US commodity growers are currently using cover crops, and the majority of those are terminating the crop before it's being carried out. So I think that's a question for Keith. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, thanks for throwing me the easy ones. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's a real deal. And not just in California, but, we deal with a lot of customers in Western Nebraska and Eastern Colorado, where it's very arid areas. And it doesn't mean that you can't use cover crops. It just means you can't use them the same way that somebody in Iowa is going to use them. With cover crops and other regenerative practices, it's all about how you manage them and how they become part of your overall system. And so if you just try to stick them in there and you don't change anything else in your whole system, it's probably going to hurt you. It's probably going to hurt your yield. It's going to hurt the performance of the next crop. So it really has to be put in such a way that it makes sense. Now, in times of severe drought, you may not be able to get it to grow. If your water is short, those are decisions that you're going to have to make. But the thing that people don't understand is they only think that cover crops use moisture. And there's no doubt that they do use moisture to grow to get to a certain point. But from that point on, then they start gaining moisture back for you because they increase the infiltration. So when you do get a rain, and it seems like almost every farmer I've ever talked to would agree that the rainfall events that we get are less frequent, but they're more intense. And so when that comes in a fairly intense storm, you've only got one chance to capture that. And if it runs off, you have lost that. You can't count that as usable precipitation. So you have to get it in the ground, and you will have far, far higher infiltration rates where you have a cover crop or even a terminated cover crop, because those root channels will help take that moisture straight down into the ground. And then by having the soil covered, you're going to have far less evaporation. And it's amazing how much moisture you lose from bare, uncovered ground. And so you can't just look at the moisture that a cover crop uses. You have to look at what the net use, the net water use it took for that cover crop, because you're gaining on the backside. Now, again, in arid environments, that doesn't mean you can plant a cover crop and then immediately plant your next cash crop right into it. There has to be a recovery period if you don't have irrigation. Frankly, if farmers were really concerned about, water efficiency and water usage, I mean, they'll lose, the typical farmer will waste far more water doing tillage passes than they ever will with cover crop use. Because tillage just dries out the soil to the depth that you're tilling it at. So again, it's all decisions. Tillage is a tool, using a cover crop is a tool, and each farmer is charged with the decision of which tool are you going to use and using them at the appropriate time. There's going to be times when they're not appropriate, but there's going to be times where they really are. But to get a farmer convinced to do that, it is tough. We've been trying for 12 years, and I love farmers. I'm one of them, but my goodness, there's some stubborn ones out there, and you're just not going to change some of them. So the approach that we've taken is we work with the guys that are interested. We work with the ones that are willing to listen. We work with the ones that are thinking outside the box enough to go, is there a better way to do this? Is there a different rotation that we need to have to do this? So it's not going to fit for everyone everywhere all the time, but it's definitely going to be a good tool to use in a lot of places a lot of times.
But this kind of flexibility that you're talking about, to really look at what crop is the right one, or can I put a cover crop in that is also a cash crop, right? Because a cover crop doesn't need to be terminated. It can be a cash crop provided you can rotate it, but then you need a market for it. Yeah. So that's the systemic issue, that we're trying to bring attention to. Okay, another question here. What new plant foods do you think the emerging regenerative agriculture field and the emerging new diet styles will be coming to our farms and plates in the next few years? So maybe we can look at this from a demand perspective first. Sophie, maybe we start with you. What do you see happening that people really crave? I mean, what are they interested in?
Yeah, well, certainly we covered a lot of it, right? Just greater diversity, uniqueness, connection to local and regional. So it's not just which types of food, but from which producers. There is this really exciting growing appreciation that Ken mentioned around local grain economies, which is super exciting. And even some schools are now putting in their own mills in cafeterias, if you can believe it, which is just taking it to the next level from just the household level. The area that I'm watching most closely is it's called blue foods or aquatic foods, and it's all the foods from the sea. And there's a whole, last week, in fact, was the Blue Food Assessment was released, a groundbreaking set of reports that essentially shows that while land-based food production systems are reaching some of their limits, there's greater opportunities to grow the food supply in nourishing, equitable, and sustainable ways from the sea. And especially what's on the horizon that could be quite interesting to see is growing interest in sea vegetables or seaweed, algae, that whole area, which of course there was a question in the chat or in the Q&A as well around how those can also help reduce methane emissions for livestock production. So there's a really exciting effort on part of at the UN Global Compact called the Seaweed Revolution or Seaweed Manifesto, which is really working on kind of the entire effort of commercializing sea vegetables and sea plants. But I do think that in general, the demand for plant-based foods, greater variety of them, and more whole and more minimally processed options. So we've seen Impossible Burger, we've seen that whole generation, and that has been groundbreaking and shifted just the entire dynamic. Obviously, cell meat is coming, TBD, whether consumers want that or not. But I see some really interesting emerging brands that are addressing the consumer interest in more plant-based foods that are exciting and craveable and enticing, but aren't puck or patty form or aren't just an imitation format of something else. Still huge demand for those things, and we've seen Oatly fly off the shelves and a number of other plant analogs. But there's kind of this white space in, okay, once I've eaten legumes and whole grains and so forth, like what else is there that is better for me, better for the planet, and make those super exotic and exciting to me.
Okay.
Hey, Klaus, just one thing to add on to that with Sophie talking about the sea farming. There's a film that's going to be coming out before too long now. It's called To Which We Belong. Our farm was featured in it, but the most fascinating part of that whole film, because I got to watch a preview of it, was a guy who is growing kelp in the ocean. Completely fascinating. I learned so much from that, and I totally agree. There's huge future there. So, but put that on your list of ones to be looking for. It's called To Which We Belong. It should be coming out fairly soon.
Cool, congratulations. And yeah, the whole kelp farming area, the term that I love and really has stuck in my mind that relates to soil or carbon sequestration in the soil is that kelp can sequester carbon, and it's this idea of the sequoias of the sea.
It grows so fast. It's incredible how fast it grows.
And like
It was fascinating.
It's like perfect, but there are, to Eric's earlier point, there's toxicity question. There's a lot of research that needs to be done before it really gets fully commercialized with that. I can't wait to check out that film. Congrats, Keith.
Klaus, I would like to just add one other thing. I think, although I eat, I'd say primarily a vegetable diet, I do enjoy the meat on occasion. And I do think that alongside the fresh vegetables and the push for non-processed foods that Sophie mentioned, we've seen an incredible amount of demand for pastured animals of all species, whether it's beef, lamb, pork, chicken. And one of the primary reasons is it just tastes better. It really does taste better. It may taste different than what you're used to, but once you adopt that difference, it tastes better. And oh my goodness, is it better for you? So I think that there's an exciting frontier, which is actually, again, going back to the future. It's an exciting frontier in animal proteins that runs very, very much parallel to the carbon sequestration discussion and healthy soil discussion. Putting animals back on the land is just a good thing.
Yeah, and you're thinking too the unique taste of pastured animals and how exciting. That's the point I was mentioning is that it's we're going to look back on the ways we've eaten and see how boring they were. If you compare, that chicken is not one thing if it's raised in different ways, or beef, right? If it's if it has the reflection of all the different things that grow in your ecosystem versus my ecosystem and the weather patterns and all of that fun stuff. Terroir, right?
Yeah.
Ken, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention oats. Sophie mentioned Oatly, fast-growing oat milk brand. Yeah, there's a lot of oat products, a lot of oat milks on the market, and oats are a very good, sustainably sustainable regenerative crop for farmers to grow. Research at Iowa State University has found that if farmers add oats to their crop rotation of corn and soybeans, they can lower their costs, they can reduce the use of herbicides tremendously and earn more profits. So it's a very regenerative crop, and it's part of this whole plant-based food trend.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to make a comment to Eric's raising animals on the farm. I mean, I grew up in Germany, and as a little boy, I would go out to the countryside, and everybody, villages consisting of small-scale farmers, everyone had, some chicken, a couple of pigs, ducks, geese, maybe a couple of ruminants, and they were being fed with byproducts coming from the farm. I mean, you basically had free protein, because all the vegetables, that were not fit to be put to the market were fed to the pigs and the poultry. And today, when you think about 40% of our food is going to waste, a lot of that has to do with the separation of animals from the land. Well, moving on to the next question here. And that's actually, we got multiple entries on the questioning the permanence of soil carbon. And that also came up in our last webinar. It's one thing to put carbon into the soil, but is it going to stay there? And what does it take to have it stay there? Is this another Keith question to start with?
Sounds like another easy one, sure. Yeah, I've gotten this question quite a few times since that article came out. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to speak to the science behind that, because I don't, I'll just completely admit that I don't understand it all. But what I tell people is, from a farmer perspective, I'm not so interested in the permanence of it as the cycle. Carbon is not something that we just want to completely remove and store away and never to see again, because it's plant food, folks. It's not a contaminant, it's plant food. And so, but in order to work properly, it has to cycle. It comes from the atmosphere, it goes through a plant, goes through the plant into the biology, into the soil. A portion of that will be fixed into organic matter under proper practices, but a lot of that is going to be returned to the atmosphere through a variety of natural processes. And the biggest thing that I tell people, and if you've never seen this video, it's a NASA video that shows global CO2 concentrations throughout the calendar year. And if you look at that, and it shows across the world, but if you look particularly at North America, what you'll see is very high CO2 levels in the winter months when there's no plants growing and pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. And then, as you get into March and April and May, and it's warming up and crops are growing, plants are growing, trees have broken dormancy and are growing again, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere are dramatically reduced. And that's because plants are taking that in, they're pulling it in, they're putting it into plant tissue, they're storing it in the soil and the roots. And so the purpose of cover crops is to widen the area where we have less CO2 in the atmosphere, because we have plants growing a larger portion of the time. So what would happen if we could gain a month on the front end and a month on the back end of that cycle? And if you've never seen that video, just Google NASA CO2 levels. It's a fascinating graphic video showing that, but what it shows is that CO2 fluctuates. It's the natural process, because it's a carbon cycle. It's not just carbon, it's either here or there. It's going to cycle. So the goal is to be getting it into the soil, and we need to have more in the soil. There's no doubt about it. Soils with higher carbon levels do everything better. They're much less susceptible to drought. They're always going to be more profitable. Everything works better when there's more carbon in the soil. And that's part of the carbonomics talk. It's like having a savings account. That's your capital savings. So again, it's not something that, that we just want to pump down into a cave and store there forever. Come on, I think that's kind of silly, because it's a valuable product for growing the things that we need to do and for making our soils healthier and more resilient. So the right practices, the regenerative practices following the principles of soil health will change the cycle to where we have more going in than what we have coming out. But there's always going to be some coming out. There's no doubt about it. And I know that article, it talked about, even the deep carbon isn't lasting, that long. And again, I don't know, I'm not going to argue the science on that because I haven't looked into it enough. But I tell people not to worry about it so much, but look at the cycle, look at the practices, and is the cycle putting more in than what it's letting escape? And to me, that's what's more important.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else who wants to comment on this question?
I'll just quickly say that I really think it is important to frame this more in the holistic benefits. I have conversations similarly in sort of talking to decision makers who are considering, as I mentioned, Regen 1, considering allocating some procurement dollars in support of regenerative farming. And it benefits soil health, quality of the food grown, biodiversity, ecosystem health, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And so some people, I think when we position it that way, it can be very myopic to just say, like, how long does the carbon stay sequestered? And if it's not, then, forget the whole practice, the whole enterprise. But it's this really quite diverse array of outcomes that regenerative ag seems to support. And more research is needed on how long the sequestration benefits last. But in the meantime, we've got a host of other reasons we really know for sure are reason enough to proceed. So that's sort of how I try to reframe it, is instead of so much, and yes, in parallel, like I said, kind of getting to the bottom of that, but there's enough to really support it already, and that can be overlooked in the discussion.
Yeah, we have only 10 minutes left here. It's a huge topic, right? I mean, the carbon markets and all of those things. And I think we're all in search of a definition on how to reward farmers for doing the right thing, but do it in a way that's measurable, and soil and carbon permanence is just a big topic in this area. So maybe it's more practices and so on. Anyway, there's a bill in the House right now, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which we have been supporting. Huge question marks on how would that technically work. But we have another question here for Sophie. So what are the best steps to take to encourage my university, my local school, my company to partner with regenerative food groups and start sourcing local food?
Yeah, well, love that question. So I think about this in a couple different ways. So like my background is in behavior change, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of different models, but essentially one of the helpful frameworks is the social ecological model. So it sounds very academic, but basically it positions you, the individual, within concentric circles of influence. And there's yourself, the individual. What do you eat? What do you put in your body? What do you buy? How are you voting with your own dollars, voting with your vote, voting with your fork, etc. So you can, for example, support products that are regenerative organic certified or use, regenerative practices. You can, there is a really exciting new-ish public-private partnership called Restore Colorado and Restore California that actually enable you, when you're at restaurants, to pay essentially a surcharge that gets fed into just a fund for regenerative farming at state level. Really interesting model that they're trying to scale across all 50 states, led by Zero Foodprint. So you can, first and foremost, ensure that you are seeking out those opportunities for your own spend. Then in household, right? And then on the community level, where your children go to school, those programs, your own university, if you're part of that, an employer food service program is really important, or again, wherever your medical healthcare needs are met. What you can do is really provide some of these tools and frameworks. There's growing consensus, so good food purchasing program, menus of change principles, asking the dining program, are you embracing one of these existing evidence-based integrated roadmaps for optimizing human and environmental health? If not, let me provide you with this open source tool that can help you, the food service decision maker, align with those. The other thing you can do just simply is that most likely scenario is actually that it's run by a contract food service management company. So that's Compass, Sodexo, Aramark. These are huge, huge companies. The good news is they've already all bought into menus of change. This is one of the most exciting things about that work that I led at CIA for Culinary Institute of America, the other CIA, for 5.5 years, and continue to work on the university side, is that there's huge buy-in already, and it's just a matter of holding them accountable. And as we talked about before, showing that there's demand for it. What we hear above all from food service decision makers is we just give people what they want. We just are trying to satisfy our customers. And so raise your voice and provide some specific ideas, and those things can really make a difference at the different spheres of influence. And then the reason I brought up that model, sociological model, is then there's policy. And don't forget policy, because kind of what Klaus said, you have to also raise your voice at the policy level to go even broader than your own food programs. And that's where you're really exercising every tool in your toolbox if you operate in that way.
Yeah. One last, thank you, Sophie, that's helpful. One last question here. Any recommended resources for investors, to fund businesses in this space? I mean, and then let's just think local level here in your community. How can you engage and invest in enterprises that are conducive in this farm to fork community food system? Who wants to? Eric, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's increasing interest in this from the. It depends on what you mean by invest, but from the institutional investment community, there's increasing interest in trying to figure out how to participate in this new world. There's still some challenges in terms of the models that they use in calculating traditional ROI, because they're not necessarily valuing the services that they say they want to invest in. So there's still some work that needs to be done on the financial modeling piece, but groups like Renewable Food Investment Systems, right? There's a conference going on next week in Oakland that are addressing this specific topic. There are a number of different organizations. I mean, we've got a group up here in Minnesota who puts together a week-long program that includes investors, farmers, food companies, consumers. But I think I've been heavily involved in the investment community for a number of years, and still the biggest block is the model that you're using to calculate returns. If you can get your head around what would be the non-traditional returns as being in part, not in total, substituting for the traditional financial returns, particularly on the front end of the investment. So we're not talking about concessionary returns, we're talking about blended returns. For those investment dollars. Whoever creates that model will have great success in the investment world, but trying to apply some of the old models to the new world of investment is a challenge.
You would think healthcare comes to mind in this context, right?
Yeah, I mean, but there are inventive. I mean, there are some inventive folks out there we're getting closer. I'm encouraged by some of the conversations that I participated in over the last 12 to 18 months. We are getting closer.
Yeah. You have any final comments on this, Ken?
Well, yeah, it seems like there's more interest from the investment community in regenerative agriculture. The one company that comes to mind is Replant Capital, and they're investing in regenerative agricultural products. I believe they've provided some funding to Danone for some of their regenerative agriculture work, but it's definitely an emerging area. I think we'll see more of that as the regenerative agriculture continues to grow.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. So we're coming to the end. We're running flat out of time. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much, panel. This has been a pleasure. And I'll hand it over to Joel for closing comments here.
Hey, thank you so much, Klaus. And thank you, Klaus, and panelists for what I think has been a very open and very informative discussion today. I would also like to thank all of our BCL and CCL volunteers who have worked behind the scenes to make the webinar and the attendees interaction possible. We've just had a flood of questions, so that certainly demonstrates keen interest in this area. I'd also like to thank all of you who registered and were able to attend today's discussion. We will have available on the Business Climate Leaders website, and we've got a slide up right now with some of the links of today's event, as well as recordings of the 2 previous events are available on our site. We also have what I think many of you have brought up a lot of great questions. We actually have a resources page where you will find many useful links related to soil health, including biodiversity, and a lot of comments on the impact that soil health and biodiversity can have on retainage of water, so that water becomes part of the conversation. We also have many resources available for all of you to better understand the benefits of the carbon fee and dividend model that levies a fee on the CO2 equivalent of fossil fuels and returns that to households, a very important subject, in the reconciliation package. And last but not least, soil health carbon sequestration coupled with the carbon fee and dividend can have a profound impact on climate restoration, which is really the focus, as well as food security, as you've heard in this discussion today. We will continue to have our series of these events in the coming months. So this is not the end, it's just really just the start. And we would welcome your attendance to those. And again, you can follow our BCL LinkedIn page for all the future details, or visit us at our homepage at businessclimateleaders.org. So again, thank you all for attending today. Hopefully it was an informative session. And for those questions which we weren't able to answer, we'll certainly be considering those as topic areas in our next conversation. And many times we try to get back with answers to so many of the questions that were left unanswered today, which we'll attempt to do our best at that. So again, thank you all so much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.